Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 424, Sweet Baby James. And the episode begins with Ash, May, Max, and Brock on their way to the battle arena for Ash's next Battle Frontier battle, but they stopped on the way as they very worriedly crowded around Munchlax, who they had laid against the shade of a tree after noticing that it had fallen ill after walking with them. They were just trying to peacefully enjoy the flowery meadow on their way to the battle arena, but they couldn't. Munchlax's breathing was even irregular, making Ash and the gang wonder what the fuck was even wrong with Munchlax in the first place. Max hoped that maybe Munchlax was just craving some food, so he tried to feed it some of Brock's Pokemon food, since the sight of a delicious snack would usually get Munchlax's attention. But after Munchlax briefly looked at the food, it actually refused. How abnormal for Munchlax. Ash came to the conclusion that Munchlax was beyond their help, and suggested that they get some help from a Pokemon Center, which Brock also agreed with. So Max checked his Pokénav, and unfortunately, he revealed that there wasn't a Pokemon Center nearby whatsoever, making May worried as she wondered what the fuck they were gonna do, since if they didn't help Munchlax soon, it could die or some shit. Just then, an old woman walked up, having noticed the gang, and asked what the problem was, seeing they were in distress, leading me to explain the situation. So the old woman hurriedly rushes over to Munchlax and examines it, feeling its head, determining that it was very hot, so it had a fever, and she tells Ash and the gang that she might be able to help. She then asked May to feel Munchlax herself, and when she did, she confirmed that Munchlax had a fever. Just then, an old man, who happened to be the old woman's wife, walked up and asked what the fuck was wrong, leading the old woman to explain the situation, and the old man confirms that the two of them could help, doing various hand expressions as he talked, which were mimicked by the Pokemon on his shoulder, Mime Jr. Ash and the gang were very surprised to see a Mime Jr., as they had never seen one before, and while they all commented that it was very cute, Ash checked his Pokédex on it to learn more information, while it proceeded to dance on the old man's shoulder, making him smile. May was especially enamored by Mime Jr., still commenting on how cute it was, but then she remembered how sick her Munchlax was and got worried again, although the old woman reminded her that she and her husband were able to help, so long as they all went to her and her husband's house, and they did. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, James's Chimecho was currently resting on a pile of leaves as James looked on, worried that his beloved Chimecho was in pain, because it was also sick. James then realized that he could just have his Chimecho use Heal Bell on itself to heal up, but Chimecho was too weak to even use a Heal Bell. James then asks Meowth where the nearest Pokemon Center is as he comforts Chimecho, hoping that he could just take it to a Pokemon Center and everything would be okay. But Meowth looked on the map of Saffron City that he had picked up and saw that there was not one on the map for fucking miles. Jessie didn't like to see Chimecho sick either, or her teammate James depressed, so she was about to suggest that James simply just have Chimecho try and use Heal Bell again, but before she could, it seems as though Wobbuffet knew that this would be a pointless idea, because he forcibly popped out his Pokeball, startling Team Rocket, and making James angry as he scolds Wobbuffet for scaring him when he was concerned about his Chimecho, and in order to get away from Wobbuffet, he declares that he was going to go see if he could find any Pokemon Centers on the horizon by himself, as he goes with Chimecho to the edge of a nearby cliff. At first, after looking around for a few minutes, he only saw some dense bushes and trees, no Pokemon Center. Suddenly though, he saw a castle. After staring at the castle for a long-ass time, he finally recognized it. He knew the place. It belonged to his nanny and Pop-Pop. But James would go there all the time on vacation with his parents. He immediately runs over to it while holding his Chimecho, finding a way down the cliff. Though unbeknownst to him, Jessie and Meowth followed, though at a much slower pace, because James was running like absolute mad. Anyways, James reached the castle first and approached the front entrance, while Jessie and Meowth were catching up, demanding that James slow down. However, James didn't listen to them, and instead called out for his nanny and Pop-Pop, making Jessie and Meowth confused, as they didn't understand what the fuck he meant. Suddenly, though, his nanny and Pop-Pop walk out and recognize their grandson, happy to see him. Yeah, that's right. James's grandparents were the man and woman that we had seen earlier. James was happy to see his grandparents as well, but he pleaded with them to help out his Chimecho, explaining that it was sick, and he knew that his grandparents were capable of helping Chimecho, and sure enough, his nanny took it into her arms and promised to help it. As she starts to cradle it. Just then, though, James's Pop-Pop looks over James's shoulder to see Jessie and Meowth behind him, and ask who they are. James's nanny spots Meowth and Jessie as well, and comes to the conclusion that Jessie must have been James's wife, since, Jessie looked like Jezebel, the person that he was supposed to marry, and they would have obviously seen a picture of her from James's parents. And James's grandparents congratulate him on the marriage. James was shocked at the thought of marrying Jessie, as he had a terrible vision imagining what it would be like to be married to Jessie, which would involve him doing the chores around the house, such as cleaning, while she just laughed and sat on the couch, ordering him around. James quickly yells, saying that getting married would be his worst goddamn nightmare. Jessie was very confused by James's sudden outburst, as was Meowth. James ignored Jessie and Meowth for the time being, though, and simply clarified to his nanny and Pop-Pop that Jessie was actually his executive secretary and Meowth was his manager. Jessie and Meowth took offense to this and were about to yell at James, but James quickly pulled them aside, away from nanny and Pop-Pop, and explained to them that, while very quietly huddled in the corner, that he didn't want to disappoint his grandparents by informing them that he was part of Team Rocket, which would inevitably come up when they asked what Jessie did for a living. And also, he just didn't want them to think that he was married when he actually hated the idea. James also explained that he really wanted to impress his grandparents because he always really liked spending time at their place, explaining that their castle here was one of his summer cottages that he would visit whenever he was allowed to take a break away from his extensive and busy study schedule. And we then see a vision of James's study schedule, in which he was always forced by a whole bunch of tutors and mentors to be forced to study and learn manners, never allowed to actually have any fun, since he would always be given assignments related to school and learning, and also he would be forced to try and learn how to play the piano and play a violin and all that shit, just productive stuff that he hated being a kid. You see visions of James being forced to learn table manners, playing the violin, and playing the piano. However, James clarified that he really liked his grandparents because whenever he came to the castle for a vacation, when he was allowed to, he was also allowed to act however he pleased, like a normal kid. He didn't have to act professional either. He could have fun, play games, eat with his fingers, and also play with a whole bunch of Pokemon, including his Weepinbell, explaining that he originally met his Weepinbell here, apparently. You know, the one that eventually got evolved into a Victory Bell that he released. And we see visions of him eating mounds of corn dogs with his grandparents happily watching, and him getting eaten playfully by his Weepinbell. James also revealed that he really respected his grandparents because they also constantly treated any injured Pokemon or sick Pokemon they came across, and they showed him what it was like to do so, as he remembered his grandparents treating an injured Doduo, putting bandages on it, and giving it some food and water to eat. His grandparents constantly helping Pokemon was the exact reason why he didn't want them to find out that he was part of Team Rocket, since Team Rocket was an organization dedicated to stealing Pokemon for profit, so his grandparents' hearts would be broken, because James clearly didn't follow in their footsteps. And so James explained that he wanted Jessie and Meowth to pretend to be his executive secretary and manager, respectively, since that way he can make it seem like he worked at a legitimate business, as opposed to Team Rocket. Jessie and Meowth agreed, although they clarified that James now owed them one. Hopefully that didn't bite James in the ass later. Just then, James's grandparents come up to James, Jessie, and Meowth, wondering why James was talking to them in secret, although Jessie and Meowth just brushed off the question and happily introduced themselves as James's executive secretary and manager. James' nanny then reveals that Chimecho definitely needed some rest, and leads her husband, as well as James, Jessie, and Meowth to a room inside the castle, which was a Pokemon healing room, and she simply just placed Chimecho on a small rest bed, informing James that Chimecho was currently suffering from extreme exhaustion. James was concerned at this, as he observed his Chimecho, and really hoped that everything would be okay. And just then, James's Pop-Pop's Chimecho, whom he had let down from his shoulder once he arrived back at the castle, came over immensely fast, since it was intrigued by Jessie, James, and Meowth. Jessie immediately thought that Mime Jr. was super goddamn cute, and proceeded to talk to it in baby talk, because of how cute it was, yeah. Anyways, James was about to introduce himself to Mime Jr., finding it relatively cute as well, but then Pop-Pop noticed the R logo on James' shirt, and asked him what it meant, though thankfully, right as James panicked, wording that he would have to reveal that he was part of Team Rocket, Jessie covered for him, admitting that it was for the company that she and James worked at, and the R stood for royalty and romance. James's nanny was proud that he was working for a company that had such good values, and wished James' parents were here to hear about this, which makes James panic, worrying that his parents may show up at any second, but his nanny informs him that they were currently traveling the world on a cruise ship, and have been for months, much to James's relief, as he sighs of relief. Just then, it was revealed that Ash and the gang were actually at James's nanny and Pop-Pop's place, and they walked into the room, asking for some water. However, their request was immediately cut off when they spotted Team Rocket, and stepped back in complete shock, seeing them. James was very surprised to see Ash and the gang as well, but quickly ran over to them, before happily greeting them and basically forcing them outside of the room and outside of the entire castle, claiming that he just needed to talk to them as he shuts the door behind him. Ash and the gang were obviously very angry at James for fucking pushing them out of the place, and they angrily ask what the fuck he was doing, although James just tells Ash and the gang to shut up. Although Brock doesn't shut up and accuses James of trying to scam his nanny and Pop-Pop, not knowing that he was related to them, and basically thought that James was trying to steal some Pokemon that they had or some shit. Although James just tells Brock to shut up too. In return, Brock was about to yell that he had every right to accuse someone from Team Rocket of trying to scam somebody, but James, not wanting Brock to unveil that he was from Team Rocket in case his grandparents heard, yelled as loud as he could, telling Brock to shut up, and squats down on the ground, starting to whisper to them, explaining the real situation, and everything that was going on with his Chimecho, and how the old people were his nanny and Pop-Pop and all that, shocking Ash and the gang from these revelations. James then asks Ash and the gang what they were doing at his grandparents' place anyways, and May explains that her Munchlax was also sick, just like James's Chimecho. Ash and the gang happened to run into James's grandparents, who claimed that they could help heal May's Munchlax, so they agreed to come to James's grandparents' place to heal Munchlax, and here they were. While James would prefer that Ash and the gang just left, he knew that they needed to heal Munchlax, so he decided to make a truce with Ash and the gang. He, Jessie, and Meowth wouldn't make any moves on Ash and the gang or try and steal their Pokemon, or any of that, so long as Ash and the gang kept a secret that James was a member of Team Rocket. Ash and the gang huddled, wondering if they should agree to this truce, but Brock reminded Max, Ash, and May that the old people were James's grandparents, and Brock wouldn't want his grandparents to find out that he was an evil member of Team Rocket, so Ash and the gang decided to agree to James's truce. Just then, James's grandparents came out, concerned with why James had just suddenly ran out with Ash and the gang, while James just smiled at them nervously. Max, being really against James, didn't want to agree to the truce, so he was about to let it slip that James was actually a member of Team Rocket, but James quickly covered his mouth and explained to his grandparents that he was just catching up with Ash and the gang because coincidentally, they were actually his friends. Despite this being a lie, Ash, May, and Brock corroborated this statement, still agreeing to the truce, and they told Max to agree to the truce as well, and he reluctantly obliged. Later, in the rest room, May had decided to bring Munchlax from another room where it was resting to rest with James's Chimecho. with May hoping that Munchlax laying next to another Pokemon may help it feel better. And sure enough, Munchlax soon felt better. So May thanked James's grandparents for allowing her to have Munchlax rest there. Just then, though, James's grandparents point out that they didn't see Jessie and Meowth, addressing them as James's employees. And this leads everyone to realize that Jessie and Meowth were gone, and James panicked at this, stressed that his teammates would do something stupid, so he ran off in a panic all around the castle to look for them, with his grandpa's Mime Jr. following. James ends up looking through the entire castle, starting with a room filled with some artifacts that James's grandparents had collected, assuming that Jessie and Meowth may have wanted to steal them, especially an old telescope, because, they were Team Rocket after all, and maybe they wanted to see if they could see any rockets in space. But after checking there, he didn't find them, so he checked outside and didn't find them either. So he went back inside the castle and realized there was one place he didn't check, which he should have checked from the beginning, the kitchen. And sure enough, he found Jessie and Meowth right by the fridge, chowing down on some of his grandparents' food. And not only that, but they were eating the food very disgustingly, leading James to scold Jessie and Meowth for their bad manners. And he screams at them, demanding that they quit eating before they got caught. And James yelled so loud that he had to cover his own ears, and Mime Jr. had to cover its own ears as well. Unfortunately for James, though, Ash and the gang and James's grandparents then entered the kitchen, having heard James's yelling, and they asked what was wrong, leading James to hurriedly stand in front of Jessie and Meowth, blocking Ash and the gang and his grandparents from seeing them, and puts his hands up in the air to further block their view, as he claims that Jessie and Meowth weren't eating anything from the fridge, they were just checking to make sure the food wasn't rotten or anything like that. In response, the ignorant James's grandparents claimed that Jessie and Meowth shouldn't have to do such a boring task, and instead suggested that Ash and the gang and James and Jessie and Meowth come on a tour of their greenhouse, where a whole bunch of Pokemon were, known as the Pokemon House. James's grandparents were very sure about this, and Ash and the gang and Team Rocket excitedly followed, as they arrived at the Pokemon House and started to walk around, observing all the Pokemon living there, such as a Spinarak, an Aipom, and a Wooper, and Oddish. While James' grandparents explained that the greenhouse was dedicated to replicating the living environments of several Pokemon they were taking care of. As everyone continued throughout the greenhouse, they were particularly amazed by a little lake with stones, and the Wooper that inhabited it, with May and Max especially intrigued by the Wooper, and Ash and Brock especially intrigued by the Spinarak and Aipom that were climbing on trees, as well as a Doduo they saw, commending James's grandparents as they saw that the Pokemon were truly happy to be living in this greenhouse. Jessie and Meowth decided to split off from the rest of the group, and eventually, Jessie was amazed to see an Oddish running past. She and Meowth followed the Oddish as it went into a bush, and ganged up on it, ready to steal it for themselves. And Jessie does, stuffing it in the back of her shirt, but this makes Oddish scream in fear, and James hears this, so he runs into the bush where Jessie and Meowth were, knowing that this scream from Oddish was likely caused by them. Right as James arrived at the bush, closely followed by his grandparents and Ash and the gang, he immediately saw Jessie and Meowth walking out of the bush, and Jessie just smiled nervously, greeting James and acting like nothing was out of the ordinary, but James then spots Oddish's leaves popping out of the back of her shirt. Jessie looks behind her and laughs, saying there was nothing in the back of her shirt, although James knew that Jessie was lying, and questioned how she could do such a thing as steal, when she promised not to steal any Pokemon. Jessie and Meowth both lied that they didn't steal anything, although Jessie deep down knew the jig was up, so she pulled Oddish out of her shirt and acted surprised, saying Oddish must have just found its way in her shirt by itself, although James knew this wasn't the case, and grabbed Oddish from Jessie and lets it go back into the bush where it should have been, and he scolds Jessie for stealing once more, although Jessie just claims that she couldn't help it, therefore making James disappointed. Later that night, when the tour of the greenhouse was done, James had returned to Chimecho's room where it was resting, and decided to sit by it all night, watching his sick Pokemon sleep. And it was then that Mime Jr. walked in and spotted this. Mime Jr. observed that James seemed pretty sad over Chimecho's current state, so it was about to run over to James to cheer him up, but it stopped itself when it noticed May walk in from another door, and she proceeded to sit on a chair by her Munchlax, who was also still resting, sleeping happily, because even though it was pretty much better, it still needed some rest. James told May that Munchlax would be okay, he was sure of it, and she shouldn't worry about Munchlax, promising that he would stay to look over both Chimecho and Munchlax. May was surprised by James' kindness and asked how Chimecho was doing, leading James to confirm that it was getting better, but it was still very weak. May offered to stay behind and look after Chimecho and Munchlax, but James argued that he should be the one to look after both of them, since he was usually the troublemaker, and he felt like being kind for once, and he especially felt like he should be there for his Chimecho. May decides to trust James, seeing that he was actually being genuine for fucking once, and she told Munchlax goodnight, telling it to do its best to get better, and left, shutting the door behind her. As soon as May was gone, Mime Jr. took its chance to finally run up to James, and greeted him happily. James thought that maybe Mime Jr. came to keep him company, and he asked if this was the case, and Mime Jr. confirmed this, leading James to tell Mime Jr. that it was very kind. And James actually came to the conclusion, when Mime Jr. continued to stand there, that Mime Jr. maybe actually wanted to join him. I guess we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, Jessie and Meowth, being the fucking cunts that they were breaking their promise to James to not steal anything, as they were currently hiding behind a pillar in a castle, plotting to steal several Pokemon, and go back to the greenhouse to do so. As they plotted about how they were going to sneak into the greenhouse, though, they started to laugh hysterically as they came up with another idea. First, they would look through the actual castle and see if there were any Pokemon inside, and eventually they remembered that May's Munchlax would be in the care room with Chimecho. So they proceeded to sneak in to that room. and they saw that Munchlax, James, Chimecho, and Mime Jr. were all sleeping. So Meowth carefully grabbed the sleeping Mime Jr. and put it into a bag that Jessie was holding, and Jessie shoved the sleeping Munchlax into a bag as well. With that done, Jessie and Meowth then ran out of the room, realizing that it was probably best they go to the greenhouse next. So they head there, running, but making just quiet enough noise that no one heard them. We then cut to another room in the castle where Ash and the gang were permitted to sleep for the night. Ash was sleeping peacefully, as was the rest of the gang, but then Ash was woken up as he saw a light outside of his window, and as soon as he woke up, he noticed that the light was coming from the greenhouse, implying that Jessie and Meowth had already reached it. Pikachu, Brock, May, and Max all woke up as well, and they saw the light too. It was confirmed that this light was in fact Jessie and Meowth, as they were currently walking through the Pokemon house with flashlights, which was the source of the light, and they were picking up random Pokemon to steal as they explored, putting them into bags, including some Wooper, Oddish, Aipom, Spinarak, and Doduo, with all the Pokemon being super duper easy to steal due to them all sleeping. We then cut to the room that James was in, and he happened to wake up, being woken up by the same light in the greenhouse that woke Ash and gang up, being Jessie and Meowth's flashlights. And as soon as he woke up, he realized that Chimecho was still there, but Munchlax and Mime Jr. were gone, and he wondered where they went as he looked out the window, seeing the light coming from the greenhouse, and James realizes that it was probably Jessie and Meowth, and was annoyed at this, obviously. We then cut back to the greenhouse, where we see Jessie and Meowth with their flashlights, and Jessie with her huge bag of Pokemon, happily marching along, since they found a decent amount of Pokemon. Just then, though, Ash and the gang barged into the greenhouse, and confronted Jessie and Meowth, demanding them to stop and return all the Pokemon, realizing they were stolen when they saw the huge-ass bag. Jessie and Meowth refuse, however, as they start to do their motto. Just then, James comes by, and just by force of habit, he joins in on the motto, saying his part, but then he realizes that he shouldn't be doing the motto, and cuts it off. Instead, scolds Jessie and Meowth for breaking their promise yet again to not steal any Pokemon, reminding them of their promise. And James demands to know why the fuck Meowth and Jessie felt entitled to break their promise, although Jessie simply said that she couldn't help stealing Pokemon and taking them for Team Rocket's benefit, including James's benefit, although James remained adamant about not stealing any of his grandparents' Pokemon they were looking after, and he tried to grab the bag from Jessie, although Jessie and Meowth pulled back, essentially creating a tug-of-war. The force of the tug-of-war, though, caused the bag to rip open, setting all the Pokemon free. All of the Pokemon native to the greenhouse ran back to their habitats, while Munchlax ran over to May, and Mime Jr. ran over to James. James, with Mime Jr. by his side, declared that he was actually going to be a good guy for once, and prevent Jessie and Meowth from trying to steal the Pokemon again. But Jessie just ignored James, as she and Meowth stated that they would be taking all the Pokemon back no matter what, and Jessie then sent out her Seviper to try and round up all the Pokemon that had scattered across the greenhouse, leaving Ash to send out his Vampy to battle it, as Jessie started off by having her Seviper use Poison Tail on it, but Ash called for a rollout attack. Seviper slashes its tail at Vampy, but Vampy agilely jumps over the attack and smashes straight into Seviper with rollout, knocking Seviper back. And as James then sends out his Cacnea, because he wanted to help Ash battle Jessie's Seviper, and much to James' surprise, Cacnea didn't hug him. However, James then noticed that Cacnea was about to fight Ash and the gang, as usual, leading James to correct Cacnea, saying that today they weren't fighting Ash and the gang, but instead they were attacking Jessie and Seviper, and ordered Cacnea to attack Seviper instead, as well as Meowth. Jessie and Meowth screamed at James for betraying them, and Meowth reminded James that he should be fighting Ash and the gang instead, but James refused to listen to Meowth and ordered Cacnea to use a sandstorm, which enveloped Jessie, Meowth, and Seviper. While Ash and the gang were shocked that James was actually defending them, Jessie refused to let James beat her, and had Seviper jump out of the sandstorm and use Bite and Wrap, heading straight towards Cacnea, but Cacnea stopped Seviper from reaching it by hitting it with a needle arm, hurting Seviper badly, and knocking it back. James then suggested that he and Ash team up with their Cacnea and Vampy and have them both attack Jessie and Meowth at the same time to finish them off, and Ash agreed, having Vampy use hidden power, while James tells Cacnea to use Pin Missile. The force of these attacks combined sent Jessie, Meowth, and Seviper blasting off in an explosion. With Jessie, Meowth, and Seviper gone, Ash and the gang congratulated James for actually helping them, as all of the Pokemon native to the greenhouse came out to thank Ash and the gang, and James for saving them as well. Just then, James's Nanny and Pop Pop come running along the top railing of the greenhouse, having heard the explosion, and they wanted to see what was going on, running as fast as they could. James didn't want to lie to his grandparents, because he already felt guilty about lying about being part of Team Rocket, but just as he was about to reveal what had actually happened, Ash and the gang stepped in and said they were just playing with the Pokemon and having some fun, and James concurred. James's nanny then asked where the fuck James's manager was during all this fun, along with his executive secretary, and just then, Jessie and Meowth crash-landed right next to James's nanny and Pop Pop, because they blasted off, but not very far. Seviper also landed right next to Jessie and Meowth, and Jessie and Meowth realized that they needed James back if they wanted to be an actual team, so they decided to try and act like nothing had happened, and simply claimed that their work was never done when it came to being James's executive secretary and manager, and that was why they were so beat up and dirty from doing work, helping out James, I guess. We then cut to the next morning, where the sun was rising, and a whole bunch of Pidgey were flying over the castle. Ash and the gang were currently standing outside the castle, with James's nanny and Pop Pop saying goodbye to them, since they were about to continue on their journey. But first, May thanked James's nanny and Pop Pop for taking care of her Munchlax, as her Munchlax was now much better, and James's nanny and Pop Pop simply said it was no problem, and James's nanny, wishing Ash good luck in the Battle Arena challenge in the Battle Frontier, since Ash had told her about it when they were walking back to the castle in the first place. Ash promised that he would do his best, and as thanks for James helping out last night, Ash decides to put in a good word for James, telling his nanny and Pop to say thanks to their grandson, who was a president of the company he worked at, saying that they had heard of him and all the good work that he had done. Yeah, they just totally made up a bullshit lie, but hey, maybe James actually deserved it. With that, Ash and the gang said goodbye to James's nanny and Pop and left. The episode wasn't over yet, though, as we then go to the castle roof, which Jessie and Meowth were above on their Meowth balloon, waiting for James to show up, because he was still inside the castle, and they were also bitchy at the fact that James ruined their chance at stealing Pokemon, but they did admit that they needed him if they wanted to be a team. Anyways, we then see James, who was back in the room where Chimecho was resting, when Chimecho finally woke up and smiled happily, but weakly, at James, happy to see him, but still a little tired since it just woke up. James was very happy to see his Chimecho awakened once again, and happily yelled out its name, believing that if it was awake, it must have been feeling better. Just then, though, James's nanny and Pop walked into the room and informed James that Chimecho was still sick and needed rest, and was even too sick to be moved from the bed it was on. Not only that, but while it was recovering, it couldn't battle at all, obviously, and it also couldn't return to James. It just had to stay bedridden for a long time to fully recover. James knew deep down that he would have to go and leave Chimecho with his grandparents, but he didn't want to leave Chimecho, obviously, saying that he really loved it, and he had flashbacks of all the amazing times that they had together, from the first time they met, to the various times that Chimecho had covered James' face with its tail, to Chimecho using Scary Face on Jessie, to Chimecho using Heal Bell on all of Team Rocket, and all the mottos that Chimecho had jumped in on. In addition to all the times that he and Chimecho had hugged happily. James, thinking of all these happy moments, struggled to hold back his tears as he grits his teeth. James finally came to the realization that he would have to leave Chimecho with his grandparents fully, and as James' grandparents looked on at their sad grandson, Chimecho assured James that he could leave, saying that he would be okay, even if James was gone. Chimecho then let out a weak smile, and James started to cry, as he saw that Chimecho was happy and sad at the same time. He was happy that James would get to continue to live, but he was sad that James would be leaving it. But Chimecho also knew that it was time for him and James to part. James then wiped away his tears, seeing that if Chimecho was super weakened and still had enough strength to hold back its sadness to make sure that James knew it was okay for him to go, then James had no right to cry either. James then officially announces to his grandparents that he would be giving Chimecho to them for the time being, and pleaded them to do their absolute best to look after it. And James's grandparents promised that they would do their absolute best to take care of Chimecho, and would be very happy to do so. With that, James searched through his pockets, looking for Chimecho's Pokeball to give to his grandparents in case they ever had to recall it. While James was searching through his pockets, though, he didn't end up grabbing Chimecho's Pokeball, and instead, 2 spare empty Pokeballs that he kept with him in case he ever encountered any other Pokemon he wanted to catch fell out of his pockets. Mime Jr. got excited by this, and much to James' surprise, excitedly ran over and pressed the capture button on one of the Pokeballs, willingly catching itself inside, after a few shakes, meaning that Mime Jr. did want to join James on his journey, just as James had predicted. Despite predicting this, though, James wasn't shocked that his prediction was actually right, and questioned why Mime Jr. actually wanted to come with him, with Nanny and Pop simply saying that Mime Jr. had taken a liking to James, it seemed like, and approved that James should take Mime Jr. with him, since Mime Jr. actually wasn't James's grandpa's Pokemon, but instead, it was just another Pokemon that they were taking care of, so it could use a new trainer. James was a bit skeptical, worried that he would hurt Chimecho's feelings, because he was essentially replacing Chimecho. He just gave it to his grandparents, and now he had a new capture. But Chimecho simply smiled again, confirming to James that it was okay for him to take Mime Jr., so long as James didn't forget him, and James promised that he wouldn't. With that, James finally went up to the Meowth balloon, after climbing up to the roof of the castle after taking the stairs, and the balloon started to fly off, with James's grandparents coming out of the castle to watch it go. James then says goodbye to his grandparents and decides to not lie to them anymore, revealing that he was a Team Rocket member, although James's grandparents confirmed that they actually knew that he was a part of Team Rocket all along. James was shocked by this and worried what his grandparents would think, but James's grandparents claimed that they knew that James must have had a good reason for joining Team Rocket, and stated that it didn't really matter to them, saying that even though he was in an evil organization, they knew James was still a kind person deep down, and they hoped that he did well in life. So James thanked them. Jessie and Meowth were pleased to not have to pretend to be James's manager anymore, while James's grandparents watched the balloon float away, hoping that their grandson would do well in life. As the Meowth balloon was floating away, James looked back to the castle and saw through the window that Chimecho was sitting up in its bed, smiling at him. This made James cry once again, but he stayed strong for Chimecho, waving goodbye to it, knowing that Chimecho would be in good hands. The episode then ends with James glad that Chimecho would be living with his grandparents as the balloon flies off.